Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
The source of the anthrax is being investigated and has not yet been determined.
Not determined back in early October when the anthrax crisis began, still not determined 6 months later. The anthrax probe. Why is there still no good lead and no suspect? We'll ask New Jersey's top federal prosecutor on this special edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
It's been more than 6 months since anthrax entered the American vocabulary. More than 6 months since the first deadly cases, since New Jersey became the focus of a national investigation. But there's been no arrest, no apparent prime suspect, no break in the case. We'll ask Christie, New Jersey's new U.S. attorney, why not and what's next. But first, here's Sandy King with some background on the anthrax attack on our national health and our national psyche.
Raymond, the timing could not have been worse, coming on the heels of September 11th, and it left us all wondering just how vulnerable we were and who was attacking us this time. A foreign enemy or domestic, a terrorist network or just one nut. We still don't seem to have many more answers than we had last October.
The risk of getting anthrax infection through an envelope coming through the Postal Service is infinitely small, if not nil.
Words spoken when we were more innocent, before dozens had been infected, before 5 of them were dead. Back when we still believed it would all be over soon. Culprit caught, case solved.
The Postal Inspection Service has a long, proud, and successful tradition of protecting the American public from those criminals who would use the U.S. mails to either defraud or otherwise endanger the American public.
But this time the public, through its mail, was endangered and in a new, unprecedented way.
Post office closed. I want to admit. Post office closed. You gotta go back.
Still, at the start, there was plenty of official optimism.
We have a 98% conviction rate on all of our cases that go to trial, so we are very confident.
But that confidence would wane as the bad news just kept coming. Deaths in Florida, New York, and D.C., exposures in still more locales. The capital shut down. The nation panicked.
It's a very, very scary thing. I mean, my mailbox is piling over. I'm not even touching my mail at home.
And for New Jersey, it was all too close to home. The anthrax-tainted letters to Tom Daschle and Tom Brokaw.
I'm angered that this has happened, but I feel very confident about the fact that everyone will be okay.
The deceptively innocent return address. It, of course, was phony. The Trenton postmark was not.
These single events at each of these 4 facilities are most likely due to cross-contamination from mail that was received from the Hamilton Mail Processing Center.
And 6 months later, the Hamilton Center is still closed, still not decontaminated, still a plastic-wrapped reminder of October's follow to the terror of September.
It was an unprecedented development, and it's an unprecedented response. And what the Postal Service is trying to do is do this the right way, and that is not rush into anything.
But slow cleanup was one thing, slow solving of the crime, quite another.
We are aggressively searching for the source of the bacteria and for the person or people responsible for the criminal acts of dispersing and sending these bacteria in the mail.
And though there have been no new anthrax attacks since last year, there's also been no break in the case. The massive investigation has failed to yield a clear answer or a suspect.
I would be very happy to say today that we have someone that we're ready to arrest, but at this point we are continuing our investigation, focusing on whatever leads are developed as a result of investigation throughout the United States.
And it was against the backdrop of that grim fact that New Jersey got a new U.S. attorney.
I think the president is comfortable that I'm someone who shares his goals and his vision.
A young and controversial choice, long on practice in GOP politics, short on background in criminal law.
I think really it kind of misses the point on what the job is all about. The job is about leadership, and I think I can bring that to the office.
And if there is a break in the anthrax case with its frighteningly close connection to New Jersey, that leadership would be tested. It could be Chris Christie, who finds himself leading an anthrax prosecution. Chris, welcome to Due Process. You came on the job 3 months into the anthrax scare. How much of your time has been spent on that, and how to explain all of these months, all of this effort, all of this money, and apparently no progress?
We're spending a great deal of time on it, not only in my office, but even more importantly in the investigative agencies like the FBI and the postal inspectors. There's been a tremendous amount of energy and time expended on trying to locate the person or people who perpetrated this crime.
Okay, what it looks like from here is no progress. How to explain that?
Well, I don't think you can say no progress, because I think whenever you eliminate certain categories of people, you chase down leads that you have and they come up dry, you're making some progress because that's ground you've covered and that you don't have to go back and recover. But quite frankly, it's been frustrating to everybody.
The initial speculation was because of the proximity of these attacks to the World Trade Center, it's connected to Al-Qaeda or whoever the perpetrators of that was. Over time, there emerged profile, normally an ugly word, but in this case, it seemed as though your office and the investigative arms had a specific notion of the kind of person this was. Why didn't that narrow the gap so that you could really focus in on the Trenton area, somebody who had access, those kinds of things?
You're talking about the use of our national public mail system, which people in New Jersey and all over our area get to use freely. So it's not as easy as just narrowing down the field. We have, I think, narrowed down the field in some respects, but quite frankly, when you talk about dropping a letter in a mailbox somewhere in the Trenton area, that is a very, very large haystack. And someone has said to me recently, you're trying to find a needle in the haystack. And I think what's more appropriate is we're trying to find the right haystack. And then we can start looking for the needle.
But Chris, the profile as outlined by the Department of Justice was very specific. How many people would have fit that profile? Presumably you've eliminated all of them. Have you now then begun to consider whether that profile might have been in error? And could we be back to looking for an international conspiracy, an international terrorist?
I mean, we're constantly looking and re-examining what we're doing in the investigation. When your investigation is not bearing fruit, you constantly take another look and see if there might be something you're missing. But I think your question also presumes that we've exhausted every person who might be possibly fit that earlier profile that you discussed.
Profile being someone who would have had access to sophisticated labs, someone who would have had familiarity with the Trenton area. I mean, there are just not that many people who would fit that, or are there? Well, are there more than we would have ever suspected?
I think so. Remember that New Jersey is the pharmaceutical capital of the world in terms of the laboratories that we have here in the state, the industry that we have in the state, so heavily focused on the pharmaceutical industry. That gives you much greater possibilities than if you were in another state which didn't have that type of industrial concentration.
So the profile hasn't been trashed?
No.
Let me flip to the other side of the anthrax question. The Attorney General of the United States has said a number of times that a priority in justice has changed, and that is prevention is just as important, if not more important, than prosecution. So the question that might be in many folks' minds is, well, does this mean that we have concern about the future? That is, this could happen again, whether from the original perpetrators or others, and that there's kind of a sense that it's hard to track this kind of crime down, and that people are vulnerable to this happening frequently in the future and perhaps to large effect?
Listen, we always have to be on guard. It is a different world now after September 11th, and we have to be concerned about many things that many of us probably gave no thought to before September 11th and then the subsequent anthrax attacks. But what I think you're driving at with your question is, how do we try to prevent things like this? I think vigilance on the part of the public and vigilance on the part of law enforcement, and even more importantly, cooperation on the part of law enforcement between federal, state, and local in ways that really, quite frankly, hasn't happened before.
But I think that maybe what distinguishes this event in the minds of people from others is that virtually everybody opens an envelope at some point, and many of us open many envelopes every day. And the sense is that not only is everybody potentially vulnerable, therefore, because you might open an envelope with anthrax, but given the fact that tremendous law enforcement resources have been used thus far to no apparent effect in terms of arrest or trial, that everybody's vulnerable, is going to be vulnerable to a large extent indefinitely into the future. That's kind of open-ended, and it's hard to see how individual vigilance makes much difference in that context.
Well, individual vigilance makes a difference in a number of ways. One is for people to look out for, and as we put out with the reward announcement that you showed earlier in the tape package, we put out what type of envelopes you could be looking for, what type of handwriting, to be careful about the way you handle your mail. We have that responsibility now in ways that we didn't have it before. In addition, we get that information out to the pharmaceutical industry and other industries that might have access to this type of chemical weapon, and let them know about what the profile we think is of the person or persons who might do this, for them to be looking on a prevention mode. So there are things you can do. Can we make ourselves 100% safe? No, we cannot.
How frightened, then, should the public be? And should we be as surprised by the fact that there have been no new anthrax attacks as by the fact that you've not caught anybody?
Well, listen, I think that in terms of how frightened the public should be, we all have to go about and live our lives the best way that we can. We have to take new precautions like I just talked about. But I also would urge the public not to crawl into a hole and not live their lives.
If your next door neighbor says, you know about these things, Chris, should I wear rubber gloves and a mask when I open my mail?
I say if my neighbor asked me that question, I'd say whatever makes you comfortable. Whatever makes you feel safer, if that's the question of how scared someone would be. Listen, I look at my mail differently now, and especially since I'm a United States Attorney, I look at my mail differently. You look at your mail a little bit differently, and you're a little bit more careful. Do I wear gloves and a mask when I open my mail? No. But I certainly look at making sure that I know who the letter's coming from.
Are New Jerseyans more at risk than other people elsewhere, given the apparent focus of this investigation?
Well, certainly the one major attack we have was centered out of New Jersey, and also given the pharmaceutical industry being centered here, there's some things to be concerned about. Do I think we're more at risk? I mean, these letters were mailed.
That sort of sounded like yes.
Well, no, because the letters were mailed to New York and the letters were mailed to Washington. The contamination that occurred happened because of the type of envelope they used and how finely they milled the anthrax.
Postmark, of course, was New Jersey.
Listen,
contamination here in New Jersey, illnesses here in New Jersey.
We are a center of a lot of different terrorist type of activity here in New Jersey. We know that. But I also think that people pick New Jersey to live in because of the type of atmosphere, the areas that we are close to Philadelphia, close to New York. There's trade-offs that you make in your life all the time regarding safety and what your lifestyle should be. And I just urge the people in New Jersey to be vigilant, but not to crawl in the hole and let their lives become less than what they should be.
Chris, how about the fact that there have been no new attacks? They just stopped. Do we expect they'll start again? Are we surprised that there have not been any?
I don't think...
For now 4 or 5, 6 months.
I think in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, we may have been expecting more. We didn't know what we were dealing with in terms of the type of person. I think the fact that there haven't been any further attacks also tells us a little bit about the person or people who may have perpetrated this first attack. I happen to think that some of the harm that happened to the postal workers and other people who were the subject of cross-contamination, I don't think that was ever intended by the person who did this. I think the targets were the targets.
If you can use the word, an ethical terrorist here who's thinking these were not the people I wanted to hurt?
No, I wouldn't call anybody an ethical terrorist. But what I'm saying is that with any kind of terrorist attack, frequently there are intended targets and then there are unintended targets. And I think that the people we're talking about, the general citizens of the state of New Jersey, were clearly an unintended target in what happened here. I think the targets were pretty clear because of the way the envelopes were presented, the way they were mailed, that the targets were the people who those letters were addressed to, and not the people, some of the people who wound up getting hurt in the crossfire, so to speak, of this attack.
So then who's ever responsible, you think, may have pulled back as a result of that?
Well, I can't, it's a speculation on my part. And
but that's part of what is being speculated?
But what I'm saying to you is, for me personally, when I look at what I see as the profile of this person, and I've come to believe that they didn't intend to hurt the general citizens of New Jersey, and they saw the harm that did result, perhaps that made that person pull back.
Let me talk about another target that was intended, but may have surprised people with the connections to New Jersey. 4 days after you were sworn in, I think, Daniel Pearl gets kidnapped, a Wall Street Journal reporter in Pakistan. About a month or so later, it's pretty conclusively demonstrated that he was killed while being kidnapped. And subsequently, at least one man who's identified potentially as a principal goes on trial in Pakistan. But there's also an indictment in New Jersey.
Yep.
There are a couple of things that many people might not know. The first is, how can you legally indict somebody in Pakistan for an event that takes place in Pakistan? I mean, what's the legal principle that permits that?
The legal principle that gives us venue and jurisdiction over this is the emails that were sent by the perpetrators to Daniel Pearl, luring him to the kidnapped site, were sent to his Wall Street Journal email address. Those emails were routed through the main server at the Dow Jones headquarters in South Brunswick, New Jersey. And because that email, one of the tools of the crime, was routed through the state of New Jersey at a server in South Brunswick, we have jurisdiction over this crime.
So that's why a person like that would be tried in New Jersey. Assume that Daniel Pearl had been kidnapped in Pakistan, an American national working for the Wall Street Journal, and there were no emails. Could the United States still reach out and try the people accused of his?
Yes, when a crime's committed, crime's committed against a United States citizen, the jurisdiction of last resort is Washington, D.C. So the Washington, D.C. United States Attorney's Office would always have the last chance jurisdiction, so to speak, if a crime's committed against a United States citizen. In this case, because New Jersey had an opportunity to be the jurisdictional spot, the Justice Department made a determination that we were the best office and the best place to indict Sheikh Omar and to try him if he's extradited to the United States.
So we have an indictment from a grand jury in Trenton, an indictment here, and we have a trial going on, presumably, in Pakistan. What's the chance that this case would actually be tried here? A, that you'd get him back from Pakistan, and B, that we'd actually have a trial here?
Well, if we get him back from Pakistan, we will have a trial in New Jersey of Sheikh Omar. That's a commitment of the Justice Department, a commitment of my office. The question is, diplomatically, whether the trial is now 4 days in Pakistan as we tape this show, and I don't know what will happen. Much will be determined by what happens in that trial there. Is he convicted in Pakistan? If he is, what type of sentence does he receive? We would hope that if he's sentenced in Pakistan to a term less than life, if he's convicted, that when he would be released from prison in Pakistan, Pakistan would commit to extraditing him to the United States, or if in fact he were found not guilty in Pakistan or given a non-custodial sentence, that they would then extradite him to the United States for trial here.
And here he would face death.
Here it is a death-eligible case, yes.
Now, I don't know whether you anticipated being involved in diplomacy when you took the job as the United States Attorney, but obviously we don't have an extradition treaty with Pakistan, but General Musharraf has made public comments that he would not object perhaps to bringing this defendant here pending what happens there. Do you have a sense about whether all kinds of events could happen in the world that might change that, or are you pretty confident that, assuming you think it appropriate, that this defendant is going to come back here and face trial in New Jersey?
I really have no idea, and I leave the diplomacy to Secretary Powell and the State Department and his interaction with the Attorney General and the President. And they will ultimately, I guess, negotiate with General Musharraf and make a decision as to whether Sheikh Omar will be sent over here for trial. All I can do as the United States Attorney in New Jersey is assure the public here in New Jersey and across the country that a trial team is ready. We are ready to go if he is extradited over here, and we will do all we can to make sure that a fair trial ensues and that justice is done.
As we talk about the Daniel Pearl case, we talk about anthrax, we're reminded of the Attorney General telling us that the #1 priority of the Justice Department is indeed dealing with terrorism. Is that also the #1 priority of your office? And if so, what has to fall by the wayside in order to make that happen?
Well, fortunately, yes, it is. First, let me answer that. It is our first priority, but nothing really has to fall by the wayside. Fortunately for us, the Justice Department has given us additional resources. I'm in the process right now of hiring 8 new Assistant United States Attorneys who will work on terrorism, also staff people underneath them who will work on terrorism. So it's not as if I have to take the same size pie and divide the slices thinner. The Justice Department, because of the focus that New Jersey's been in terrorism, gave us one of the largest allocations of new terrorism Assistant United States Attorneys. I'm in the process of hiring those people now. I believe I'll have them in place probably by the middle of July, and then we'll be ready to go. We still are working on terrorism today, but I'll have 8 new attorneys to be able to work just on terrorism.
Now, is your office also involved in some other issues relating to 9/11, that is, issues concerning the INS status of many people who have been detained in connection with the general investigation?
We get involved in a tangential way with that. If the INS has problems with their detention, obviously the United States Attorney's Office and our civil division will deal with some of those issues. We're also obviously very involved in any of the other aspects of the World Trade Center that affected people here in New Jersey, the World Trade Center attack. We still participate on an ongoing basis with our friends in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of New York and in Richmond, Virginia, who they're bringing the Moussaoui case. And so we're helping and participating in that regard as well. So those things are things that we're doing on an ongoing basis, and we're expanding to look into the prevention mode as well, in terms of investigating things that are going on that might normally not be considered connected to terrorism at all, whether it's identity theft or credit card fraud. We know that all those things went on with the 19 hijackers. So we have to start being more aggressive, and we are, in terms of pursuing those issues, because we never know. At the other end of that investigation, what looks like a standard credit card fraud may be someone who's preparing to perpetrate a terrorist attack on the people of New Jersey.
You came into this job at a very exciting time. You came in with great support from the White House, support from both U.S. senators from New Jersey, and yet you also came into a chorus of naysayers who said he simply doesn't have any criminal experience, he's not qualified for the job. You said at the time, and we saw it on the tape piece, the job's about leadership. In these last months, what would you point to as evidence that, in fact, that leadership has been realized?
I think what you can do is you have an enormous amount of resources at your disposal, and what you need to do is decide how to shepherd those resources and allow your Assistant United States Attorneys to have the resources and the support that's necessary for them to do their job the right way. Everything from the indictment of Mayor Barnes and Patterson, to the recent activity in Essex County in the political corruption area, to the information that we were able to call with local law enforcement on the trafficking of young teenage Mexican girls into New Jersey to be prostitutes. These are all things that I talked about in my speech when I was sworn in as priorities of mine after terrorism. And in the first 100 days, we have been able to bring indictments that are meaningful in those areas, and we'll continue to pursue that. And that's what I meant by leadership in that earlier interview. You have to decide what the priorities are, and then I have 135 excellent Assistant United States Attorneys who are going to go out and execute that vision.
Let me turn to an issue that relates back to the discourse about the war on terrorism. There's a Harvard professor, a law professor, who's saying that given the balance of equities, that maybe torture is a possibility. That is, maybe he's even advocated a torture warrant if you knew that a person who was a suspect might have knowledge about possible deaths of a large number of people. Have you given any thought to that? Do you have any opinion about whether torture is a possibility that's being discussed in mainstream law enforcement?
I cannot believe, given the history of this country, that no matter what the threat to our country, that we would forsake our protection of liberties to the extent that we would advocate torture as a way of getting evidence.
You've heard the Alan Dershowitz line on this, though, right?
Mr.
Most
Dershowitz
famous
says a lot
law
of things.
professor in America, they say.
Well, he certainly does everything he can to make himself the most famous law professor in America. But the fact of the matter is, just because he's famous doesn't mean that his opinions are necessarily valid. And all I would say is, listen, those decisions are decisions that are made at the highest levels of our government. But I've got no indication from the Justice Department or anyone else that that kind of thing is even under consideration. And I think, again, that's the kind of hyperbole that doesn't necessarily make the country better. He's free to have that discourse, but I don't think that kind of hyperbole
I raise it
makes the
because
country
he
better.
is playing to a widespread fear people have, and in the time of fear, people can embrace solutions that we might find horrible, and I was curious as to whether justice is considering that.
No, I have absolutely no knowledge at all that they are, and I don't believe they are, but I would tell you this, that's part of what leadership is about too. You have to be cool-headed in times of crisis to be able to not go too far.
Okay, well, we've gone too far because we're right up against the end of this program. It means you'll have to come back and talk to us about anthrax and other stuff in the future.
Anytime.
Thank you. That's it for this special edition of Due Process. For Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Obviously, whoever did it's very clever, and I don't think they're going to find out, actually.
I try to be careful. You know, I go to my mailbox and I take the mail out with rubber gloves.
They have no idea who did it. I mean, they can't get to find out who perpetrated the crime.
We have to live in fear, not knowing what's going to happen.
And I would hope that the law enforcement authorities or the FBI would try to find the people responsible for doing such a terrible thing to innocent people.
There should have been a lot more attention paid to it. I mean, except we're hearing it on the news, and I don't feel any safer, but I've just kind of blocked it out.
I'm hoping that they're looking into it deep enough that they really are trying to find who did it.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,